It's Monday, July 7th, 2025, and this is the Progress Texas Daily Dispatch, rapid response on breaking news stories Texas progressives need to know. I'm Chris Mosier. If you're like me, what should have been a celebratory or at least relaxing 4th of July weekend became something closer to a statewide nightmare with dozens of deaths. Many of them young children and many still missing this morning in floods centered in Kerr County but extending beyond the hill country of Texas. All of us at Progress Texas have been following with a mix of hope and horror as a disaster of undeniably historic proportions has played out in Texas and continues to play out. At the very top here, I will extend our deepest sympathies to the families who have lost loved ones, many of whom again continue a heartbreaking search for those loved ones as I'm recording this morning, and also our deep gratitude and admiration for the brave and determined people who also, even now, continue the hopeful search for survivors, both Texans and people who have traveled from out of state in a huge moment of need. Our hats are off, and we wish everyone involved in that effort safety in a very hazardous situation. Progress Texas is a political organization which advocates for progressive views and priorities. One thing we will not do is attempt to take advantage of tragedy to further a predetermined political goal, nor will we stray from the facts as we understand them, but we will attempt to solidify that understanding based on the facts, many of which relate to infrastructure and procedure, which are put in place by parties who have gained control over those factors via our political process. To insist that politics don't relate to the situation, that it's too soon to go there, to ask others not to bring politics into it, is simply not consistent with the reality in which this terrible situation exists. And that reality in Texas is one that, as we've said, has been crafted by 3 decades of policy and infrastructure decisions made by a state government almost completely under the control of the Republican Party. It's ridiculous to blame any individual lawmaker or politician for what happened over this holiday weekend in Texas, but it's equally ridiculous for those lawmakers to now try to deflect attention away from the fact that they crafted key factors in that situation over those last 3 decades. So let's get up to speed here. ABC News, as of 5 a.m. Central this morning, places the death toll at least 80 confirmed deceased and at least 41 others still missing. A federal disaster declaration has been signed and FEMA personnel are now on the ground in Kerr County. President Donald Trump dodged a question from reporters on his previously announced plans to phase out FEMA, as ABC reporters find that internal documents indicate a current shortage of staffing within that agency. Trump is said to be planning a visit to Kerr County on Friday. There's a flood watch today across a vast expanse of Texas, including the entire Texas Hill Country and extending as far as San Angelo, Uvalde, San Antonio, Austin, and Killeen, much of which is now saturated, leading to an increased risk of additional flash flooding today. To the blame game, which got underway early on the Friday holiday as state and county officials immediately attempted to shift blame to weather forecasters for underestimating the storm. Joe Hernandez at NPR goes back over that well-documented timeline, reminding us that as early as Wednesday, state officials knew there was significant weather inbound and, in fact, had begun activating state emergency response resources. By 2:35 on Thursday afternoon, over 12 hours before the event, the National Weather Service at San Antonio had issued a flood watch for a wide area, including Kerr County. By nightfall, significant rain was falling across the area. The National Weather Service issued a flash flood warning for Kerr and Bandera counties at 1:14 a.m. on Friday. That includes an emergency alert transmitted to mobile phones, almost 3 hours before that warning was upgraded to a flash flood emergency at 4:03 a.m., and the Kerr County Sheriff's Office began reporting flooding at low water crossings at 4:35 a.m., right as the flood wave struck. One of the first officials to speak up on Friday morning, Judge Rob Kelly, the top elected official in Kerr County, gave a press conference in which he called his county section of the Guadalupe, quote, the most dangerous river valley in the U.S., unquote, but then insisted the county officials didn't know this dangerous weather had been possible. As Governor Greg Abbott put it in his press conference, quote, to most people in the area, flash flooding would mean one thing, not what it turned out to be, because they deal with flash floods all the time. There's the potential for flash flooding, but there's no expectation of a water wall almost 30 feet high, unquote. What's lost here, and what's been confirmed by multiple atmospheric science experts, is that the actual degree of rainfall from any storm is always an estimate, that the National Weather Service relayed all the information it had on hand in a timely fashion, but that information was not interpreted by local officials as a dire warning. On the National Weather Service, the question arises and remains unanswered, really, as to whether or not current staffing shortages contributed to the situation. Job cuts under the Trump administration at the NWS and its parent organization, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, have resulted in a reduction of 600 positions, which had led to a destabilization of operations that, as of just last month, was being rectified by bringing back some of those weather professionals who had been fired en masse. One of those was Paul Ura, who had worked for the office for 32 years before he was forced into early retirement by those cuts back in April. His job had been as a warning coordination meteorologist at the NWS's Austin and San Antonio office, the very one with jurisdiction over the Guadalupe River Valley, an experienced veteran of the kind one would want in position at such a drastic moment. BBC coverage notes comments from Nim Kidd, chief of the Texas Division of Emergency Management, at Governor Abbott's press conference yesterday, that cell phone coverage in the affected area is lacking. In a moment when so much emergency information is tied to our phones, that is a communications infrastructure failure. Kerrville City Manager Dalton Rice notes that he thinks the public has become desensitized by too many weather warnings. That's an indication of a long-term procedural failure. A New York Times report says that 8 years ago, Kerr County had considered setting up a flood warning system along the river, similar to a tornado warning siren, but it was never implemented in the most dangerous river valley in the country due to cost. So instead of an automated system in which flood gauges would activate sirens automatically downriver from rising waters, Kerr County locals along the river continue to rely on a loose word-of-mouth system. That's an obvious situation where budgets were prioritized over public safety. But let's be fair, Texas counties have only so much money, and you'd think that the state might pitch in for something so important. Well, that almost happened in the most recent legislature. The Texas Tribune writes that freshman Republican House Rep Wes Verdell from Brady, who represents Kerrville at the Capitol and was all over CNN yesterday talking about how nothing could have been done to prevent this tragedy, himself just weeks ago voted against House Bill 13, which would have established a statewide plan to improve Texas's disaster response, including better alert systems, along with a grant program for counties to buy new emergency communication equipment and build new infrastructure, specifically including automated emergency outdoor warning systems. HB 13 actually passed the House overwhelmingly, only 14 against, including Verdell's, but then it died in the Senate. Now, this law would not have changed things over this weekend, but it's a perfect example and indicator of how our state government focused on posting the 10 Commandments in public school classrooms, focused on subsidies for private schools for wealthy families at the expense of public schools, picking on the vanishingly small minority of trans Texans, focused on continual attacks on reproductive freedom, focused on banning THC. Can simply let a pretty basic safety infrastructure initiative fade into the background and fall off the table, even after massive support in the lower chamber. That is a complete failure of leadership, and our leadership in Texas is Republican. That's not spin, that's facts. Representative Wes Verdell tells the Trib, quote, "I can tell you in hindsight, watching what it takes to deal with a disaster like this, my vote would probably be different now," unquote, and how very convenient. We don't have time this morning to get far into the fact that these extreme weather events are directly tied to human-influenced climate change, another problem that Republicans ignore at best and deny at worst. Axios collects quotes from a variety of climate experts, including Andrew Dressler, director of the Texas Center for Extreme Weather at Texas A&M. He says the floods of this weekend are, quote, "exactly what the future is going to hold," unquote, noting that Kerr County was unprepared and other local governments had better take heed. UC Davis Earth and Planetary Sciences professor Nicholas Pinter says climate change as it applies to weather modeling, quote, "is shifting those probabilities, sometimes bringing us floods that are more severe and more frequent than in the past," unquote. UCLA climate scientist Daniel Swain says, quote, "this kind of record-shattering rain event is precisely that which is increasing the fastest in warming climate," unquote, referring specifically to slow-moving torrential thunderstorms. As far as the politics of this situation go, politics lead to policy, and bad policy leads to tragedy. One guy who took it on the head for going there this weekend was longtime beloved local Austin meteorologist Jim Spencer, a giant in his field, who wrote on his Facebook page about the backlash he drew for laying out facts in a similar way to how we have this morning. Jim writes, quote, "To those accusing me of politicizing a tragedy, there is nothing political about asking hard questions when more than 70 lives have been lost. Holding public officials accountable isn't partisanship, it's journalism. If seeking the truth is now considered political, that says more about our broken discourse than it does about me. This is news. It's unfolding now. Parents are grieving now. People are looking for answers now. If I were the parent of one of those missing children, I would demand those answers immediately. Silence doesn't honor the dead. It protects the status quo. I'm shaken by this whole thing, and if anything I've said came off as harsh, I'm sorry, but I won't apologize for doing what journalists are supposed to do, shine a light when others would rather look away." Unquote, and absolutely. You'll know that generally, folks who say it's too soon or somehow outside the realm of politics when avoidable tragedy strikes tend to be those who are in power and those who must now account for their own votes. As the next election approaches, let's vote for better. Our mission at Progress Texas is to counter the conservative disinformation machine, which is funded by oil and tech billionaires and religious right-wing activist groups, all while fact-based independent media outlets increasingly face threats to their funding. While access to those outlets is frequently free, as it is here at Progress Texas, it takes listener support to keep fact-based independent media going. If you've come to appreciate what we do, now more than ever, we could use your support as a monthly contributor, and no amount is too small. Go to progresstexas.org/donate like Kelly Craven Sharp, Marta Crawford, and Chuck Cruz all have lately. We appreciate all of you very much. That's the Progress Texas Daily Dispatch for this Monday, July 7th, 2025. Links to all these original stories can be found in our show notes. Progress Texas is a nonprofit rapid response media organization promoting progressive messages and actions. While campaigns come and go, we're the permanent home for progressive media and action in the Lone Star State. I'm Chris Mosier. Thanks for listening. Again, our deepest condolences to the untold number of Texans who have lost someone they love over this horrible weekend, and our praise and thanks to all who are working so hard in the many areas of Texas impacted by the floods. Please be safe, everyone, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning.